intro. Welcome. Thank you for coming out tonight to the Wayland Library. Thank you so much to John Barrett for coming out as well, a last minute sub in. John is a graduate of BC and he got an MA from Catholic University. He's been teaching at Curry College since 1997, where he's chair and senior lecturer in communication. He's the president of the Vokes Theatre and chief gardener of the Vokes Rose Garden. In addition to teaching courses in the theater concentration at Curry, he serves as the technical director for all Curry theater productions and occasionally directs. And I'm sure he'll tell us about his show that he's working on at Vokes as part of his presentation. I'll just let you know we are recording for Waycam and our YouTube channel. And if you're joining us on Zoom, put your questions in the chat at any point and I will raise my hand and read them aloud. Would you like us to hold our questions till the end or?
Yeah, it's okay.
All right, thank you.
It's gonna take me a bit to get used to the microphone. And then I'm a professor of communication, and I'm gonna use the microphone. I know you were promised a look behind the curtain, and we'll get to that. But when I had to step in for Donnie, who was called away on a family matter, he led me to believe that the talk was supposed to be about Vokes. So I sort of started preparing that, and I'm gonna go with that a little bit at the beginning because it's interesting. Some of you may know this, but the story of the Vokes Theater and the Vokes players in town here is really the story of this extraordinary woman, Beatrice Herford, really a treasure. Beatrice was born in England in 1867. And her father was a Unitarian minister who at one point was actually the minister of the Arlington Street Church in Boston. His assignments moved him back and forth across the Atlantic. So Beatrice was raised in both America and England, largely in England in her younger days. But she, from a very early age, had an interest in performing. And she would do things like dress herself in rags and go out the front door of the house and come around to the back door as a beggar woman begging a meal from one of the maids. Alternatively, she would dress herself up in her finest traveling clothes and go out the back door and come around to the front door and be greeted by her sister as a visiting cousin who had come to stay for several, and she said we would keep this up for several days. I know a lot of this because in the 1940s, Beatrice gave a talk to the then Vokes players, and somebody transcribed it. So a lot of this stuff that I'm going to tell you is essentially from her mouth. Early on, she and her sister also would perform what she called Punch and Judy shows, puppet shows for the family or the neighbors, using their dolls as the characters. And this is a direct quote. Once we did Henrik Ibsen's A Doll's House with potatoes. It was great fun. So she always was interested in performing and telling stories and doing these impersonations, at 8 or 9 years old, impersonating a bag lady. And she very much wanted to go on the stage. But of course, as the daughter of a Unitarian minister in Victorian England, that was out of the question. But in those days, the latter half of the 19th century in England, among the gentry, big deal to have a house party for the weekend. And there was always entertainment. Might be, a young man playing the piano or a soprano singing or whatever. And Beatrice attended a couple of these events and said, well, maybe I could do that. And since she was just doing what her father termed impersonations, this was okay. Because these were private gatherings, nothing, vulgar for the public. But she would do what she called impersonations. And these were characters that she wrote and performed, completely her creation. And I'll jump ahead a little bit and tell you that we have a doctoral thesis in the library of the theater, a copy of the doctoral thesis from a PhD, University of Houston. And the subject was the evolution of the one-woman show. And this person credits Beatrice Herford with inventing the art form. That, you know, sort of runs from Beatrice through Ruth Draper and up through Lily Tomlin and Anna Devere Smith. There had been solo performances before this. Sarah Bernhardt notably did a tour being Hamlet, alone on stage, just doing all of Hamlet's monologues, dressed as Hamlet. But Beatrice is the one who's credited with creating, writing, and performing her own show. It starts with her. And some of you, I know some of you have been to the theater, you may have seen, every 9 or 10 years, we perform an evening of Beatrice's. They're called monologues, but they're really not. They're scenes, because when she's there, she's talking to other people. She's alone on stage. No props, no scenery, no costume changes, but she would do 5 or 6 of these impersonations of an evening. And all of the women are irritating. That was her thing. So I'm gonna give you a very lame impression of one of her impressions. And remember, this is written more than 100 years ago. And this is the woman at the drugstore. And it goes a little bit like this. So excuse me, is this a drugstore? Oh, it is. Oh, where are the drugs? I see the magazines over here, and I see the children's toys over there, but where are the drugs? Down there. Well, I was down there by the perfume and the chinaware, and I didn't. It is a drugstore, and and on like this, and you can hear the poor clerk behind the counter saying, "Lady, I just work here." Yeah, but there are these wonderful little things where you can hear the other people talking. She's got one calling the doctor. And she's blah, 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 blah. And again, alone on stage, blah, 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 blah. Yeah. Could I speak to the doctor, please? Oh, I know he's very busy, but I really must speak to him. Yes, I'll wait. Yeah. Hello, doctor. Yes, I just wanted to ask you, if it's not too cold tomorrow, would it be all right if baby? Well, no, he's fine. No snuffles. No, I just wanted to know it. Well, I'm sure you're busy. I'm sure that's why I didn't come in. I think it's terrible the way people waste a doctor's time over nothing, which is why I stayed home. But I wanted to know, if it's not too cold tomorrow, on and on like that. It runs about 8 minutes. During the whole conversation, she's congratulating herself for not wasting the doctor's time. I won't do the last one because it's way too complicated, but it's my favorite. It's the lady at the exchange counter. Again, no props. She's holding in her hand some very odd piece of silverware. She can't even identify what the utensil is. She's got it in her hand. And she's at the exchange counter. It was a gift, so she has no receipt. She can't identify what it is. She doesn't even know if it came from this store, but she wants the money. And again, you can imagine the back and forth with, so she started to do this. And then she became such a hit at these house parties that a bunch of her friends said, you have to do this. You have to put on a show. You have to do the end, some of her friends, and her friends are like Frances Hodgson Burnett, who wrote Secret Garden, who hand wrote the invitations to this event at a salon in London, to which George Bernard Shaw came. So, this is the kind of person who wound up in this little thing in Wales. But this is one of my favorite quotes. She does the show for the literary and theatrical elite of London, and it's an enormous hit. There are reviews in the paper. G.B. Shaw wrote a review, and the quote I'm going to give you, he meant as a compliment. He said, when Miss Herford performed The Woman Leaving on the Train, I became so irritated, I desperately wanted to change carriages. So, she was, she's an enormous hit. And as she was performing, she's kind of intermingling, she became very friendly with Ellen Terry, who was one of George Bernard Shaw's leading ladies and one of the great theatrical stage actresses of the late 19th, early 20th century, who at a later point came here to Wayland to visit Beatrice. She bumped into Ethel Barrymore and they became mutual admirers and great friends. And Ethel Barrymore has also in the past been to the theater here in Wayland. All of these, monstrously important people, and she was an enormous success on both the London and the New York and Boston stages doing her show. And in 1897, she married a gentleman of leisure from Wayland, Sidney Hayward, and just as a playhouse, literally almost like a dollhouse, she built what is now the Volks Theater on their property in 1904. It was never intended to be a public venue because this was just a little private playhouse for her and her friends. It's tiny now, it seats 146, but I was doing the math preparation for this. The physical plant now is about 6 times bigger than it originally was. It seats 146, those of you that have been there. It originally seated 44. If you're sitting in F or G, that carrying beam that's right over your head, that was the back wall of the building.
Wow.
There were 4 or 5 rows downstairs, and there's 1 row in the balcony. And again, that carried the back wall of the building was right there. The access was a wrought iron stairway inside where the box office is. Because it was only for a handful of Beatrice's friends to come and see her perform. So when Ethel Barrymore would come through Boston on a pre-Broadway tryout on Monday night, the dark night for the Barrymore show, Ethel would grab up some of her buddies, they'd come out to Wayland, and Beatrice would open up the place and do her show. So for the first 30 years or so, there were never, there would be some performances for inviting Wayland neighbors, but never the public. Beatrice her second performing life came when she got on the Keith vaudeville circuit in the 20s and 30s. And, again, she was an enormous hit there. She interspersed that with some Broadway performances, notably Mrs. Hardcastle in a production of Goldsmith, She Stoops to Conquer. But on and off, these people would come by the theater. And if you haven't seen it, those of you who've been to the theater, inside the inside door of the door to the box office, the notable people who have come to the theater to visit her sign their names. Like Gillette Burgess, great man of letters in the early part of the century. Ellen Terry came. George Arliss, who was a great stage actor and had a great stage hit with a biography of Disraeli. He played Disraeli. He's the first British actor to win an Oscar in the late 20s, recreating his stage role. He came, he signed the door. All of these people came to visit Beatrice. Right in the front of the lobby, there's a picture of Ethel Barrymore and John Drew. And the Drew family was a multi-generational group of performers, as was the Barrymore family. And at one point, one of the Drews married one of the Barrymores, and we got Drew Barrett. But the reason I wanted to tell you this, to have some appreciation of who she was, but also at a certain point, 1937, a local group of amateurs said they really wanted to do a play, but they had no place to do it. And she said, but use the place. And this, she's hanging around with these Nobel Prize winners for literature and Oscar winners and the cream of the state. And, a bunch of local yokels like me come along and she says, yeah, use the place, sure. And so she became a great supporter of the group. The theater is actually named after Rosina Vokes. The Vokes family was a family of performers in England in the 19th century. Rosina was kind of the head of the troupe. Rosina, and she had two sisters and a brother. And somewhere along the way, they picked up another guy, and he changed his last name to Vokes. And the five of them were the Vokes family. And they had commission plays that would be written for the five of them. One of the sisters, I think, was Jessie, was a great dancer. So there was always a dance specialty number, and the other sister sang. So they'd say, but Beatrice was an enormous admirer of Rosina Vokes. So she named the theater in honor of her friend. So are we good? Because I wouldn't want you to miss any of this, because I'm pretty good. So over the years, as I say, the building literally has expanded in all four directions. The seating capacity was tripled by moving that wall back. And because the theater was conceived for Beatrice to stand there alone and do her monologues, the stage is very tiny. So the backstage was also moved back about 15 feet or so. And that was the situation when I came there in the 80s. Since then, we built a shop. Before Paul was part of the group, the stage left was the wall. Stage left was about 4 feet from the edge of those posts at the edge of the stage. And the only place we could build was on stage, because it was literally the only place that there weren't seats. And so on a Columbus Day weekend in I want to say 1983, we built a 16 by 20 foot shop and storage area. And these are in the golden days before there's an internet and there's no email. So when you walk out of the office at 5 o'clock on Friday, there ain't nothing to do until the next work week starts. So we took a Columbus Day weekend, we had 3 days, and a gentleman named Chris Kroll was one of the leading actors in the group at the time, and by profession an architect. And a name I'm sure many of you are familiar with, Bob Gibson, was a contractor. So we had an architect and a contractor and a whole bunch of guys who had nothing to do for a 3-day weekend. And it's like what I romantically think of as an Amish barn race. The only thing we paid for was a concrete foundation board. And we came in and we framed up a wall and stood it up and braced it and put the other wall up and put the cap on, the roof, and all in a 3-day weekend up against the existing structure. And the last thing we did was sawzall out the old wall. Is one of my favorite things in the theater. They're a little bit out of your sight line when you're sitting in the audience, but there are posts holding the wall up. And these posts were, as I say, about 4 feet from the exit wall. And there was a light on the post, one of the posts. And there was a little 3x5 card on the post that said, the switch for this light is on the wall behind you. Well, of course, that wall got removed. But nobody thought to pull the card, which stayed on that post for 20 years after the wall was gone. Switch had to be moved. And in those days, there were only 2 bathrooms, the bathrooms that are now the actors' bathrooms, but they were the only bathrooms. and they were backstage. And you couldn't go back there in the dark during the show. So some of you may remember, in the up through the early 80s, if you were in the audience and you needed to use the bathroom, you had to go out. If we were doing the January show, you had to go out into the snow and trudge around the back of the building and come up a stairway. And of course, you always ran the risk of running into the King of Denmark in the line. So at a certain point, we decided to put in restrooms for the audience. So the lobby was expanded out that way. So, as I said, the sitting area was expanded, the stage was expanded, the stage left turned into a shop, and stage right an extended lobby. And all of that stems from Beatrice's incredible generosity. Not only did she let the group use the place, in the mid-40s, she sold it to the group for $1. And every opening night until she passed, she attended the opening night of the Vokes Players sitting in her box. Again, if you haven't been there, think of it like a dollhouse. And so she's used to late 19th century Victorian opera houses, seating 1,000 people with a balcony and stage boxes. If you can picture anything you've ever seen of Lincoln's assassination, I think there were 6 people with him in the box the night that he was assassinated. Well, you can barely fit one in these boxes because it's supposed to look like that, but it's all shrunk down. But if you go far enough back to the Restoration period, the stage, what they call stage boxes, were literally on the stage, so that King Charles and his 27 mistresses could be seen by the audience. And Beatrice, God love her, would come every night, every opening night, and sit in her box, which is stage left, house right as you look at it. She would be there in the Grand Dame's box, watching the show. And from her writing, said she took great comfort in that, in the fact that it was being used. And we are incredibly fortunate that we have this physical plant. There are many community theaters, as I'm sure you know, that have to rehearse someplace and then rent the high school auditorium or something to do it. And having this incredible gift, it built as a theater, not an adapted space. It's been a great blessing to us. Questions about any of that?
Where's the dressing room?
Downstairs.
You do have a basement.
We have a basement and we have a sub-basement. So the green room is downstairs. It's directly under the stage. And under where the audience sits is where we have storage for furniture and props and a costume room. Yeah.
Where did Beatrice live? Did she live right in the area on that property? Or is the house still there?
Her house is still there. It's a couple of houses west of the theater on that same side. So yes, she built the theater on her property. But since then, there have been pieces, she deeded the theater land to the group when she sold them the building. And the house directly to the west is only 20 years old or something like that. Her house is still there, but it's a little bit further west. So it was obviously quite an extensive estate at one time. Back when, in 1904, when land was probably cheaper. Interestingly enough, the concession stand, the Dribbly Nibs General Store, actually predates the building. Before she built the theater, because she was married in 1897, and the theater was built in 1904. Before she built the theater, what is the concession stand was in her garden near the actual house. And she put up this sign, Dribbly Nibs General Store, and she would, to entertain herself and the neighborhood children, sell them candy for a button or a rock or whatever. But the point of it being Dribbly Nibs General Store is she conceived of the operation of this place as two lovely old spinster ladies, a Miss Dribbly and a Miss Nibs. And when a child would come to the window to make a purchase, she would go around the corner out of their sight and hold conversations with herself in two different voices as these two ladies. And when the theater itself got built, she had that moved over to become the concession stand. But yes, her house is still there.
So
Yeah.
it was expanded in the 80s?
Well, I mean, since I've been there, what you would see is pretty much what you would have seen, in the 60s or whatever. But again, if we're in the audience, all of this to the left, where we build, that's new since I've been there. And the lobby is newish. What the lobby originally was just that narrow part as you walk towards the back. That's how wide it was. That's the outside wall of the building.
Was this functioning as a theater in the 70s?
Oh, yeah.
Because I think we were there in the 70s. I'm trying to remember what it looked like.
We're a little older than the building.
Yeah. So the actual exterior doors were back up in line with that wall of the building. So we built the two bathrooms, we built the brick, we paid to have the brickwork done. And then moved the exterior doors out. But it has, and the last thing was, and now you see the gable when you come in, the library that's to the right as you approach the building. Because we wanted a more, the board meetings were being held in the lighting booth. It was very cramped. And we had tons of scripts from, 60 years of performance. And so we built a library. We built that gabled edge. That's the last thing. And probably the last thing for quite some time.
The people who came up to visit her in Wayland
Yeah,
came up to act in Boston, I assume.
yeah.
And then they took, what is it, a half a day or a day to get out to Wayland?
I'm not big on,
They didn't drive down the turnpike.
Well, they
so
didn't
it's
drive
a
down to the turnpike, but
Amazing trip.
I'm sure the rail line was there,
Oh, okay.
but yeah.
Middle of nowhere.
Yeah, it's intriguing, but yes, I mean, I know they were there because I got their signatures. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about the history of the company? Is it the same group that purchased it?
Well, community
Evolved.
community theaters evolve. Oh, that's a heavy deal.
I didn't mean to ask it.
No, it's just like, probably most of these people are gone now, or whatever, but when I came along in 1979, we kind of shoved out the old guard. Yeah, I feel bad about it now as I talk to you, but you know somebody? or no?
That's because you're the old guard now.
Exactly, yeah, exactly, and now, now kids say to me, didn't you used to do plays, Pops? Community theater is an interesting thing. I mean, it's a hobby like every hobby. And everybody should be able to do it. But, the metaphor I always use is your local tennis club. There are some people there who played on their college team and flirted with the idea of going pro and maybe, and they're really good. And then there's, some guy who's my age that has never had a racket in his hand in his life, and his doctor says, you got to start doing some cardio work or you're just going to drop dead. And so this guy can barely get the ball over the net, he's not going to play with somebody who once had the option of going pro. Because the pro is just gonna be whizzing 100-mile-an-hour serves past them. And the pro doesn't want to do that, play with somebody who's never gonna, so you have to kind of find your own level. And the difference is when you're playing bridge with people or, playing tennis at your club, you're not charging people to watch. So that makes it a little complicated, but at least when I started, at Vokes had a rule that most other community theaters had, and many still do, where members of the group are supposed to be given preference in casting. Now, this is the biggest lie in theater. Because any director will tell you somebody's always a little bit better. Even if it's very, very close, there's something about the timbre of the voice or something. But they will tell you, all things being equal, the member gets the part. But, it's never that. But most people know that if you want to get asked back again, you use a lot of the people. I did a show I was asked to direct a show for a group that I won't name. And I said, what's the casting policy? And they said, all things being equal, but, the members. And I said, look, this is your money. I'm a hired gun. If you tell me half the cast have to be members, I'm good with that. I'm good. It's your money. What do you want? No. Cast the best people. So I cast the best people. None of whom were from the group. And this woman who had told me this poor woman, she was in her first year as a president of this group. And she came to me like 2 weeks into rehearsal and said, I told you that you should just cast the best people. I guess we didn't mean that. But it's too late. But at any rate, the group, by happenstance, a group of people came along in between 78 and 81, who were very serious. The college great tennis players. And we just wanted to do the best we could. And it was a group of people who said, I'd rather have a small part in a really good show than be the star in a bad show. I know that sounds very noble and everyone's going to tell you that's what they're doing. But what that meant was, if you had to live by that, which meant if you had been sweeping the floor and, building the scenery and working the concession stand, and there was a part you really wanted, and somebody came in off the street that nobody had ever seen and got that part, you had to live with it. And the people who didn't, we had a woman who got to be vice president of the organization. And this is, by the way, any of you ever want to get involved in community theater, look out for the people that are on the board of directors. This person got to be vice president. And her first meeting as vice president, I was on the board at the time, she said, okay, we're going to have a new rule. This is the rule. Once a member has directed a play, that person can't direct again until every other member who wants to direct gets a chance. And we said no. And she quit. And she was a very valuable member. She and her husband were both wonderful, wonderful performers. I can safely say this because they've long since moved away in retirement. But it was a loss. It was a loss to have her not as a performer, because she was a wonderful actress. But we were going to live by this creed. And so, bitter with the sweet, you take, you live by it. So we do have a reputation of being a little more hard-edged. We hope that we also have a reputation for doing consistently, reliably entertaining work, but it comes from putting the work first. So, you know, there's that.
Just a question from online, are any of the actors paid?
No. So we are a community theater, and we're organized as a community theater. And we live by that rule. We try to behave in a professional way, but because of the community theater structure, because of the kinds of ticket prices you can charge in competition with other community theaters, you can't pay people for their time. And Paul has worked on, 143 sets without earning a dime. We could never pay him for his ability and his time. So, we live with that. The directors and the designers get a small stipend because some other groups do. So we're going to at least be competitive. But one of the things that one of the things that we cling to is there's no point in even starting up that path, because if you started to say, I'm getting X amount of money for this, 70 hours of work, once you start to put that math together, it would seem silly. So no, none of the actors are ever paid. Yeah.
How do you go about selecting plays and casting?
Now I'm gonna brag about how good we are. There is a play committee. And when I came along, the president of the group pretty much picked the plays, and that meant that if you were a buddy of the president, you got to be the lead in the play. And so, as I said, you gotta watch out for the board of directors. They're terrible people. So we have a play committee that is independent of the board of managers. The board pays the bills, keeps the doors open. The play committee picks the plays. And this is, again, part of the financial structure. The mandate to the play committee is do things that will be interesting, do things that we want to do. Excuse me. Rather than guess what will be popular with the public. Now we we want the people to come see the play, but because community theaters can't pay, you have to be putting on things that are attractive to the most talented performers. So the paradox is that rather than thinking about what the audience might want to see, if we do plays that draw the most talented people to be in them and direct them, we will be doing things that please the audience. So the actual way to please you is to consistently do things of quality rather than picking a name that we think might be great, but it turns out nobody wants to be in it and the cast is weak and the show is unsatisfying. So it's difficult because we do try to operate, we are a small business. We have $100,000 annual budget. That's much comes in and that much goes out. But nobody's, there are no stockholders, there's no venture capital, nobody's getting any money from it. And you have to fight against the idea that what's important to do next month is a money-making show rather than a good show. Because as you well know, we exist on our subscriber base. And what our subscribers tell us, you might not know this, what our subscribers tell us is we always have a good time. And so that's what we're trying to make our hallmark. Not that, oh, I love that show, I want to go see that show, but that you would trust us to come and it's always going to be pretty good. But as I say, the paradox is that the way that you ensure that quality is having really, really good performers. Because good performers can make a lot out of a bad play. Bad performers can't save
Yeah.
even a great play. So my mandate, the president, my mandate to the play committee is pick things that talented people will want to be in, and the rest will take care of itself. But the play committee is completely independent from the board. Because we want people to be on the board because they want to shoulder the responsibility for paying the bills and keeping the place open. We don't want people to be on the board because they think that will give them a leg up on being in the show. There's as Jack McCoy would say, there's a Chinese wall between those two things. It's just they're completely independent.
Just follow up, when you have a season of 4
Yeah.
plays, do you take into consideration what the season is?
Oh, you have to. And again, you have to financially. So we have a production budget for the year. So we're gonna spend X on costumes. So, years ago we did, Cyrano de Bergerac, set in the days of the Three Musketeers, ribbons and, hats and things, that's a lot of money. If we're gonna do a straight play, we call it a show with no music, we're gonna do a straight play that's a heavy, heavy costume play. That's not the year we're gonna do My Fair Lady as the musical, which has got 800,000 costumes. So, we have to look at if we're doing this, if we decide that Cyrano is worth doing, that's a big expense. It has to be something else, a good show, but it's 5 people in modern dress. You have to do something where there are enough men and enough women's parts to keep people interested. You can't get too heavy on one or the other because people will go elsewhere looking for things to do. As much as I would like to do Shakespeare every year, it's not everybody's cup of tea. So, okay, we did a Shakespeare last year, we're not doing a Shakespeare this year, that kind of thing. There is a lot that goes into it. Primarily financial, but so this is my go-to. We're going to talk a bit about props and costumes and things. There's a show, wonderful show, True West. 4 people, a modern dress, unit set, so that the set isn't expensive. The costumes are not expensive. My wife, who's a very talented actress, you've seen her, but she also likes to help out on props. And when the subject of True West comes up, she goes crazy. Because, you don't present this to my wife as a cheap show. Because in the show, one of the characters is a writer, and he writes on a manual typewriter. And his thug brother trashes his manual typewriter with a 5-iron. So you lose a 5-iron and a manual typewriter at every
Oh my
performance.
God.
That's expensive. So all of that factors in. And in fact, there is a production committee that is responsible for picking up from the play committee and helping the show get into production. And the production committee meets with the play committee early on in the selection process to say, hey, I forgot about the typewriter. To let the play committee know that's a big expense. We're not saying don't do the show, but we're saying if you're going to put that in, you got to account for some savings somewhere else. Yeah,
Is the casting always done by the director?
absolutely.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
And again, when I came, there was a casting committee. And here's the thing. Any artistic endeavor, but certainly a play, can only have one overriding artistic vision. That's the director. If I envision some character as a big, boozy, brawly kind of a guy, and somebody else envisions the character as a sneaky, weaselly little guy like me, I don't need somebody sitting here saying to me, oh, you should use that guy. That's not my vision. It isn't a question of being right or wrong. You know, it's like having a football play. They say, all right, we're gonna run right. Well, I want to go left. Well, okay, you can go there by yourself, but it's not gonna go, we're not gonna get anywhere. So when my group of junta people took over, the first thing we did was we get rid of the member preference in casting, and we got rid of the casting committee. I did again, and I don't go, you know, by the time I'm through with my stories, you'll know why, but I don't go elsewhere anymore. But I was, on a different occasion, hired to do a show, and they told me I was gonna have a casting consultant. And every time somebody came in who wanted to be the male lead, he would say to me, oh, he's a drunk. All right, oh, no, he doesn't know his lines. Yeah, he never comes to rehearsal. And when the auditions were theoretically over, this guy tells me he wants to audition for the male lead.
Oh.
No. So, but, you know, seriously, a big part of it is convincing when we hire somebody else from the community theater. You know, a lot of our members do direct, but we're always looking to grow the group, and so we'll hire somebody. You know, I tell them, you know, when I say cast the best people, I mean it. I'm not gonna come to you 2 weeks in and say, oh, well, I guess we didn't mean it. Cast the best people. Because, you know, in their defense, they are used to being other places where if they don't use enough members from the core, they don't get asked back. And I'm sometimes at great pains to tell them, I'm dead serious. You don't have to do that. The best thing you can do is put on a good show. That's all we ask. But the casting is absolutely up to the director. Now, sometimes they will bring people in. So there are people who say, you know, this is my friend, you know, fine. You know, if you want to rely on that person's judgment, that's fine. That's you. It all stems from you. If you want to talk to 7 people, fine, but it's up to you. You don't have to. So, you know, but it is always the director's decision.
And who chooses the director? Sorry, another question. Who chooses the directors?
The play committee. I'll get to you. Because you're matching so ultimately the play committee decides we're doing these 4 plays and we're using these 4 people. Over the years, again, the play committee is completely independent, and depending upon who's in it, it sometimes works differently. There have been groups of the play committee or iterations of the play committee that will say, this is the perfect season. We're doing this. Now let's find the 4 people. Other times they'll say, let's get the best 4 directors we can and see what they want to do. But by the time, wherever they start, by the time the process is finished, there is a director matched up with each show in the season. Because occasionally, when they start with the season, it turns out that for some reason, one of the plays that they really want to do, none of the directors that we want are intrigued by that particular show. So you don't want to get stuck with a show in a season where there's, you know, you don't trust the person who's going to direct it. Yes.
So I wanted to ask about the players. A lot of them seem like they come off the Boston stage at least, or from out of town, or.
Yeah, I mean, so, you know, again, I know how this is gonna sound, don't show this to anybody from other communities. We do get people who are professional. who were doing a play they've always wanted to do, and they happen not to be employed at the beginning, at the moment rather. We do have a smattering of people who have professional backgrounds. When Betty Cloud, who's passed away now, was a great member of the company. She had been in the Royal Shakespeare Company, but she's British by birth, obviously. Her husband, his company transferred him to America, so of course she came, and we were very pleased she picked us to be, Royal Shakespeare Company. Okay, yeah, Betty, why don't you go over there? Only if you want. It's okay. So, but when I was in my 20s, I was a professional actor. I tell my students this to make sure that they don't get too highfalutin about their plans. The very first job I had out of college was doing Shakespeare with Al Pacino. It was not long after that I was touring rural West Virginia with Ronald McDonald. So there are highs and lows, but we do have a smattering of people with professional backgrounds. Yeah. But you get tired of being poor.
Yeah.
I did a show at Arena Stage in Washington, which is it was the very first non-Broadway show to win non-Broadway theater to win a Tony. And it was a wonderful experience. Oscar winners and all in it. But I was being paid minimum wage, which, at the time, this is a long time ago, it was like $1.60 an hour. So, but you get paid, the rehearsals were 5 hours. So I got paid 5 hours during rehearsal, but the play was only 2 hours long. So when we finished rehearsal and we went to perform the play, my pay went down because instead of getting 5 hours a day, I was getting 2 hours a day. 2 hours a day minimum wage is not, it's not really enough to get by. So there was a lot of Kelly temp work and that kind of thing in the daytime. But that's just the way it is. What else? Well, if you're not bored silly, I will give you a little bit of the notion of what you were originally promised in Donnie's thing about interaction with the director and the designers. So my very, very first big time directing job, I was very fortunate that I knew socially this guy who was a professional set designer. And he agreed to do my show basically as a favor. So I'm going to sit down with the set designer. This is my first big directing job. And I'm thinking, okay, all right, Eric, here we go. I get some paper. I think the door should be over here, and I think the window should be over there. And he said, "Oh, tell me about the people who live in the house." And well, I'm here to talk to this guy about the walls and where the door is. Tell me about the people who live in the house, because it came to me ultimately. You walk into somebody's house, you've never been there before. Maybe you know them only slightly. You get impressions of what kind of people they are by the way the house looks. Are the walls in the parlor blood red, or are they robin's egg blue, or whatever? And so he wanted to know from me what I wanted the audience to glean as who these people were before he started talking about wall color and furniture. Who are these people who live in this house? Some years ago, I was visiting a woman. She was an actress in the show I was directing. We had a cast party at her house, and in a living room sort of parlor, there's a whole wall of books, but they were all beautifully bound sets. So, be like, 20 books with identical red bindings of the great books, and, another set over here with, and, because I have a lot of books. I mentioned to her, that, wow, very impressive, what's your favorite or whatever. So I've never read any of them. It was decor. And, that's fine. It's gonna sound like I'm putting you down, I'm not. The room was beautiful. Now, my library is, well, I mean, it looks like this, and I don't mean, in that there isn't a set of anything. And, my books are all alphabetical, but what that means is there's a wonderful hardbound book next to a crappy paperback and all that sort of stuff. Because the only thing that's important to me is that I can find it. Twain is under the T. She had a different perspective on what her, let's call it, library should be. It was a perfect show place. Anybody could walk into that house anytime at the drop of a hat, and the place would be beautiful. My wife will tell you, if we're gonna have somebody over for dinner, I have to spend a week picking up the crap that I've left lazily. My wife is a saint. But just that, we know that in this play, it calls for there being a couple of bookcases full of books. That's just the beginning. What books? Arranged how? Similar story. Years ago, we did a play called Lend Me a Tenor. And the structure of the play is it's 1929 and the Cleveland Opera Company is going broke. So they take all the money they have left and they import Il Stupendo. I mean, you're supposed to think Pavarotti or Caruso or something, the greatest tenor in the world is going to come to Cleveland and give a performance. So they put him up in a hotel. And I'm sitting down with the props person. And by now I'm not, I know enough not to start, talking about the props. She says to me, "What kind of hotel is it?" And that's because, like Eric, the set designer, she wants to give me the vision that I want. So we know the opera company is going broke. So what does the director want? Me, the director. Does he want, we're going to try to cheap out and put the guy in a bad hotel and hope he doesn't notice? Or are we going to, blow whatever? Because before she starts looking for the first prop, she wants to know what kind of hotel is it. And I said, it's the best hotel in Cleveland in 1929. It doesn't matter whether I'm right or wrong with that. That's where I'm steering the ship. And that's all she needs to know. Then she's gone. Okay. And 2 days later, she comes back with photos of 3 different silver tea sets from 3 different consignment shops and says, pick the one you want. Because ultimately, it all comes back through the director. But before the first attempt at searching is made, she needs to know, where am I going? Brings up another thing. Anybody know what a phone book in Cleveland looks like in 1929? Very small, very small. Because even in 1929, in a city as big as Cleveland, very few private homes had a phone. It turns out there is a museum of phone books. Not museum of phones, museum of phone books, which has a website. So my props person finds this thing to get what it looks like. Now, the interesting question that brings up is, every once in a while you have to deal with, do I want to be authentic or do I want to look authentic? This is what the book looks like, but is 75% of my audience going to say, that's not a phone book? It's always a judgment call. The one thing you should, now that you're so knowledgeable about this, the one thing you should take with you when you go to the theater is everything is a choice. Everything you see, somebody thought about, somebody discarded that idea or went with the other idea. It's never, well, we need some cups for this. Go down to the prop room and get some cups. Every article of clothing, every prop, every color on the walls, every piece of furniture has been selected. to send you a message to help shape what you perceive when you see it. And it's all about fulfilling the director's vision. And which is why all of these people start with, where are we going? You know, what is the plan? I did a show 30 years ago. I did a show about a bunch of people, completely innocent people. It's Venezuela in 1820, and Bolivar is in full revolt. And the Spanish captain of the guards says, go out into the public square, grab 6 people. And they bring them in. And there's one traitor officer who knows where Bolivar is. And he's the 7th person in the room. They bring him in, and the guy says, you have an hour to get this, let this guy tell me, to get this guy to tell me where Bolivar is. And if he doesn't, all of you are going to get shot. And so these 7 people are in this room. And I had made this, our stage is very small. I had made it even smaller than it was because I wanted that sense of confinement. Because they're just in a room, they're just in an anteroom of the barracks. It's not meant to be a jail or whatever, it's a small room. And as we do, you tape out on the floor. So, well, the walls are going to be here, but until the walls are built, let's get a sense of how big this space is, so you don't go wandering off through walls. And a week, 10 days into rehearsal, I'm watching this and I'm doing the blocking. I say, okay, you need to go over now and talk to the captain. And it was just hard. People were having to shove and elbow their way through and I said, I don't think this is working. So I tell you what, guys, this is what we're gonna do. Before you come in tomorrow, I'm gonna move the wall back like 3 feet. I'll retape. And my cast rebelled. They said, no, it's good that we can't move. We're supposed to be confined. We've been, locked up here and we can't get out. The fact that we have to crawl through bodies to get to the other side. So, that told me 2 things right away. One is I'm an idiot. And 2, that we were going to have a great show. And I was right about both, because the structure helped them feel confined, even though obviously they were Beatrice Herford's Volks Theater on Route 20, and we're going to be down at what was then Callahan's for the beer afterwards. But that you can help the cast as well feel the reality of it by the way you shape it. So I'll come back to everything's a choice. Everything's a choice. Just because our stage is already too small to really do a play doesn't mean I can't make it small for this particular purpose. To help you in the audience and the people on stage get that sense of confinement. Because we're not, I teach a class in stagecraft at my school. And the first lecture is, or I tell them, I'm going to give you right now the first question on the first quiz, which will be the first question on the midterm, which will be the first question on the final. And it's complete this sentence. Everybody who works on a theatrical production is, and the answer is a creative artist. Nobody's just painting a wall. You are building somebody's house. And nobody is just sewing a hem. You are making somebody's dress. And you are creating a real artifact for a real purpose, for a real person. Nothing is random. Nothing is casual. Absolutely everything is decided. So the flip side of my great story about the small room is I was doing a set for another director on Eddie Carbone, Arthur Miller, Fifth Miller Bridge. What happens in this play is there's a guy, Eddie Carboni, he has an unnatural attraction to his own niece, which he rejects, because it's disgusting, but it's there. These two immigrants come in illegally, and they know people from the old country, so they're there, and they get housed in Eddie's apartment. So now it's Eddie and his wife and his niece and these two young virile guys. And the whole point is, this is a little apartment really for just Eddie and his wife, but they've taken in their niece who's been orphaned. She's like 17, 18. Now there are these two other guys kind of sleeping in the living room. There's not enough room. So I'm back to this thing, so I make the set small. And the director says to me, well, I'm having trouble with the blocking. I'm having trouble. All they talk about in the play is how cramped and jammed in they are. I couldn't sell her. But she's the director. It's her show. So I widened the set considerably. When we went to see the show, I got these 5 people performing on what looked like the flight deck of an aircraft carrier, talking about how cramped it was. Totally crazy. But I gave her what she wanted. Everything is, and I tell my cast this, this is my vision. We're doing this my way. If I'm wrong, we're at least all going to be wrong together. And one of the through lines of my talk tonight, you live with that. You live with that credo. And, when somebody else is directing, that's what she wants. Okay. And, I did my best. That's what you're going to get. That was, boy, that was hard. Can you take my name out of the program?
One last question online. Can you say a few words about Beatrice the cat, the one non-human member of the Vokes? Please.
This is going to sound really dumb. That cat changed my life. I have always had a lifetime aversion to cats. In part, I didn't grow up around pets because my father was desperately allergic to animal fur, which killed him because he loved dogs, but we couldn't have a pet. But there was a period when every woman I dated had a cat. and just, is it okay if, Mervyn sleeps with us? No, it just, so I couldn't, and I won't bore you with this part, but there's a catalog of stories with my disastrous interactions with cats. So one day, a stray cat walks into the building. And, we put up signs and the people started feeding the cat, and 2 people, Sarah Clausen, long-time Wayland resident, I'm sure some of you may know, Sarah Clausen, this guy, Steve McGonigal, said, let's adopt the cat. And I said, no, 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 no. Who's going to take care of the cat? We will. No, 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 no. So Steve and Sarah, we're going to have this cat. Just keep the thing away from me. Sarah's father becomes ill. She goes to Connecticut to take care of him. Steve gets a job in Houston. Now we got a cat alone in an empty building. Rehearsals at 7 o'clock, but 21 hours a day, there's nobody there. So I said, I knew this was gonna happen. I can't leave this poor animal there alone. So I start stopping by on my way home from work and feeding the cat. on my day off, I'll just go. So there's somebody in the building with the cat. And I'm, you know, one day I'm playing with the cat. There's a fence for this play we're building, doing. And then, you know, you do that thing you do with the cat. The cat's on the other side of the wall, and I'm, you know, crouching down and coming around this way to see if Beatrice, and, you know, going around this way and to see if I can be quiet enough that and she's always catching me, you know, just and I come up and I look over and she's not, and she's gone. Because she's behind me. Not only is she playing the game, she's beating me at it. And pretty soon, because I could never touch a cat, Pretty soon, if I'm sitting there, she's jumping up in my lap. And actually, if you look at my Facebook page, there's a shot of me like this, and Beatrice is right there. Because that's what evolved into, you know, when I walked into the building, she would run to me, I would pick her up and she would sit on my shoulder. I would just support her, but, you know, she was really handy. And she would stay there for hours. I would direct, you know, one-handed because she was there. And, you know, my wife was a great cat, is a great cat lover. She grew up with dogs and cats and parakeets and fish. And I, for the first, I don't know, 15 years of our marriage, I said, I love you, but I just can't have one of those things in the house. We have 4 cats. Which never would have happened if it hadn't been Beatrice. But I mean, she was, you know, she was half dog. She would come when you called her, or she'd come when I called her. She was a tremendous hunter, you know, just always bringing in mice and, you know, rabbits and moose. But everybody loved her, you know, and you know, she was, you know, she was a delight. But, you know, personally for me, you know, she became my cat.
Thank you.
We tried to put her in a play and she wouldn't do it. Wound up using a stuffed cat.
Any more questions? This has been wonderful. Thank you so much.